Hey guys, what's up? Isaiah here with part 2 of the Let's Code series. Running through processing, sort of showing you a little bit more about how it works and some of the basics of programming, but then we'll be jumping into some real stuff at the end of the video. So for starters, let's pick up where we left off. Let's have a void setup and a void draw. Like we said last time, setup is run once at the beginning, draw is run multiple times throughout the program. We're going to ignore setup for now, but we're going to move on instead to draw. So in draw, the three loops we're going to be talking about today are if loops, for loops, and while loops. They all are pretty powerful, they all do different things, but they all work somewhat similarly. I guess we'll just jump right into it. We'll start off with the if loop. So in if loop, the way you write it is you say if, open close parentheses, open close curly brackets, and then you'll put some stuff between the curly brackets. But the key to it is in the if loop, within the two parentheses, similar to how we have print line and then we put some words in the parentheses. The parentheses of an if loop takes in something as well. It takes in sort of a statement that it can evaluate as either true or false. So this one, for example, will say if 5 is less than 10, then inside the curly brackets we want to have print line, and we'll say true. So if 5 is less than 10, then we should see a whole bunch of trues down here once we hit play. And we hit play, and there you go, there's a whole bunch of trues being spewed out. Actually, instead of in draw, let's actually move this stuff to setup so we only see it once. So, and if loop is as we said, if something is evaluated as true, it's gonna go here, and if something is evaluated as false, it's gonna, well, we didn't say it, it's gonna buy right past it. So if we put 5 is less than 4, print true, we shouldn't see any trues when we run this. And there is none because there shouldn't be, because 5 is not less than 4. So that's pretty much how an if loop or an if statement works. Alternately to the if statement, there's the else statement. If and else go together very closely. The syntax would be, if some statement, curly brackets, do something if it's true, else do something if this didn't run, so if this isn't true. So how we have print line true, we'll put print line false here. So if 5 is less than 4, it'll print true, else it's gonna print false. So you run it, should see false. Cool. It's pretty simple. It's pretty much, it could be pretty powerful. You could do a whole bunch of cool things with it. So like if 1 plus 1 is less than 5, should say true, which it does. Yeah, so you can sort of start to see how this can be very useful later on in programming and in applications and things. The next loop we're gonna go through is the for loop. So for has a similar setup. For open close parentheses, open close curly brackets. Inside the for loop, you'll put a whole bunch of stuff, but in the for loop, in the parentheses, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So this is the syntax. You want to do for. You always want to start off with an int. So for int, I'm just gonna call it I for integer, equals 0, semicolon, I is less than 5, semicolon, I equals I plus 1. And then in here we'll actually just do print line of the variable I. So there's a lot going on in here, and I'm gonna break it down. So in the for loop, in the parentheses, the first thing that we do is we make an integer. We make a variable, similar to how I said there are variables in math and algebra, geometry, things like that. There's variables in programming. We actually just made one right here. int I. So I is now can be referenced anywhere inside the two curly brackets as a thing. And we set I equal to 0 as soon as we made it. So we said the variable integer I is equal to 0. Cool. Then after that we said I is less than 5. This is a checks, just like how in the if statement we put, 5 is less than 10. This one we're saying I is less than 5. So it's gonna check every time it runs for that, and then after it says I is equal to I plus 1. So basically this is a setup. The first part is going to be a setup. The second part is going to be like a check, and the third part is going to be when finished. And we'll kind of get a little bit more into that later. So what this app is going to do is it's going to make an integer I equal to 0. It's going to say, okay, this I that we have is I less than 5. If it is, it's going to run this code. If it's not, it's going to end the for loop and move on to the next lines. And once it gets to the end of whatever is in this for loop, it's going to say, okay, I is now equal to I plus 1. So it's going to increment I by 1. So if you run it, you'll see that we get the output I is equal to 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Not 5, because I was less than 5 was sort of the check. As soon as I became 5, it no longer met this statement, and so it left the for loop. So yeah, that's pretty much the for loop. We could do a couple more intricate things in here, but for the most part, that's going to be the structure of it. Sort of a beginning, what are you checking in the middle, and then what's happening at the end of the line of each sort of cycle. You can know if you change this to say 10, we should get the numbers 0 through 10, but not including 10. So if we run this, if we stop it and run this, we'll get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If you want it to include 10, you could do less than equals, which is like saying if I is less than or equal to 10, in which case when we run this, we should get 10 at the end. So that's pretty much the for loop, and the last loop we're going to be working on is the while loop. So while is a sort of simplified version of the for loop, but the while, for this intents and purposes, we'll kind of be doing something similar with it. So setup is while, open close parentheses, open close curly brackets. But before the while loop, we'll actually, just like how the for loop, it used the int I, we'll do that here as well. We'll do int I equals 0. And then in the parentheses of the while loop, we'll do while, we'll say while I is less than 5. What we're going to do here is print line I again, and then after the print line, but within the while loop, within the curly brackets of the while loop, we're going to say I is equal to I plus 1. So this is pretty much the same code as the for loop, and when you run it, you actually see you'll get the same results, except it allows for much more repetition. I personally don't use a lot of while loops. I would prefer to use for loops. I think it's just nicer to have sort of these different parts in one line. But as you can see, I mean, it's really whichever one you're more comfortable with, whichever one you understand better and can sort of visualize and wrap your head around better is the one that you should go with. We covered a couple different things. We covered making integers or making variables, how we would do that. At least we touched on it. We covered the if loop, we covered the for loop, we covered the while loop. You're really starting to learn a couple different things, and at this point, with just the tools we've covered so far in the series, you should be able to make a couple cool either counters or displays like ask robot responses, things like that, sort of like a count from 1 to 100 and see how long that takes sort of thing, or ask type in your name and have it spit it back out at you, or type in a really long math problem and have it answer it for you. So yeah, I mean that pretty much is it for this video. The next video will actually be jumping in and working on the Painter app that I showed you guys a little bit earlier. And yeah, we'll pretty much just start working on that. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know sort of what you did understand, what you didn't understand, what I could elaborate a little bit more on. If you are having problems, one thing you can do is go to processing.org, and from here along the left side you'll see a link for reference. If you click that, it will bring you to this page with a whole bunch of the different sort of functions and things that we were working with. So if you, I'm just going to control find it. If you look for if, conditional if, or oops, I hit on else. But if you'll sort of see the same sort of implementation that we did. You'll see a couple different, examples, and it gives you a little description of it, the syntax, the parameters, a whole bunch of things like that. So if you are having, problems with what we're going over, if I am going over it too fast and you didn't quite get something, be sure to check these references out. They're really helpful. It's how I pretty much learned all the new functions that I use. So they're really good. And until next time, like I said, if you have any comments, be sure to leave them. But until then, see you guys later.